Hello, and welcome to the Faith in a Busy World podcast with me, Steve Griffiths. It's lovely to be back with you again as we continue to work our way through the book of Revelation together. Perhaps you've had an opportunity to see some of the earlier podcasts in this series. If you have, then I hope you found them useful. If not, then please do check out the playlist on my Faith in a Busy World podcast YouTube channel. I've got a whole load of new technology going on here at the moment in the studio. So obviously, if you're watching this on YouTube, then I hope it's going to be a good experience for you. If you're listening to the audio version, then the new software isn't going to impact you at all, I'm afraid. But there we are. And today we are looking at Revelation chapter 7, which is a really, really famous passage. It's the passage that talks about the 144,000 and the great multitude and all that kind of stuff. So it's a really, really crucial passage for us as we consider the book of Revelation. And we're going to crack straight on with it today. And here is what is coming up for you through this podcast. You see, I'm trying to get used to these new buttons and everything as we go along. Here's what's coming up. So firstly, we're going to think a little bit about what Revelation chapter 7 is all about. And then we're going to ask the question, who are the 144,000 who are mentioned in that chapter of Revelation? And then immediately after the 144,000 are mentioned, there's talk of the great multitude as well. So we're going to think about, okay, well, who are the great multitude? And what has all of this got to say to us today? So that's what's coming up in this episode today. So there we are. So let's crack straight on with it because I value your time and I don't want to waffle on too much. But let's think firstly about a brief background to Revelation, just to kind of catch up with where we're up to on the podcast series. The book of Revelation was written, as you probably know, in AD 96 by the Apostle John. And he was in exile on Patmos, and God visited him with a vision. And as we've explored in previous episodes of the podcast, the book of Revelation, as I understand it, is structured around 7 different sections. And each section looks at the history of the world from the first coming of Jesus through to his second coming. And it looks at it from lots and lots of different perspectives. So it kind of builds up this picture, if you like, of the history of the world from the first coming to the second coming. Revelation chapter 1 to 3, where there were letters to the individual churches, was very much the perspective of what's going on during that period here on earth. And then in Revelation chapter 4, we were then taken up into heaven, and we were given a glimpse of what worship is like in heaven during this period. Then in Revelation chapter 5, which was the scrolls and the seals, we thought about how God is in control of the whole of history. And then in Revelation 6, our last podcast together was thinking about how God is judging the world throughout this period. Even before the final judgment, there are judgments being made by God in the world. So that's kind of where we've got up to at the current time. Go back over the previous podcast if you think that might be helpful to do so. And today we are moving on to Revelation chapter 7. And in Revelation chapter 7, we are brought back into heaven again, as it were. And we get another perspective of what is going on in heaven during the time prior to the second coming of Jesus, if you like. So that's where we're up to. We're going to crack straight on with it, and we're going to start with verse 1, which says this. After this, I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds of the earth to prevent any wind from blowing on the land or the sea or on any tree. Now, that's a really kind of interesting verse, isn't it? And what is going on here in this verse? Who are the angels? What are the 4 winds of the earth? And what is this actually referring to? So that's what we're going to think about first of all. And in this verse, we are introduced to some angels. Now, we know already from the book of Revelation that angels are God's agents in the world. And sometimes in the Bible, they are human beings, and they have the word angelos, people who are acting for God in the world. And sometimes in Scripture, the angels are spiritual beings. And in the context of Revelation 7, verse 1, I think what we're talking about here are spiritual beings. The angels are spiritual beings. And it says that in that verse, the angels are at the four corners of the world. And I think what that is saying to us is that God is in control of the whole of creation. There's no part of the world that is not under his control. And that's a really important thing for us to hear, just as it was those first Christians who received the letter of Revelation from John. Because when we look at the world around us today, and we see the wars going on and the famine and the brokenness and the climate crisis and all the other stuff that's going on in the world, sometimes we are tempted to say, where is God in all of this? It just feels really chaotic, doesn't it? And it feels like events are out of control. That's how it felt for those first Christians when they received the letter from John, the letter of Revelation, because they were facing persecution. They were struggling economically. They couldn't get jobs. They were marginalized in society, and there was an awful lot going on. And they must have thought, where is God in the midst of this? And that's so much a question that we ask ourselves, isn't it? And the book of Revelation is really there to bring us comfort and hope. That's why John wrote it, not to scare us with all the sort of imagery in it, but to bring comfort and hope. And so by these four angels being positioned at the four corners of the earth, north, south, east, and west, it's a symbol that actually God is in control. And despite what we see going on in the world around us at the moment, we can still trust that this is God's world and there is no part of his creation that is beyond his control. And then in that verse, it says that the angels are holding back the four winds. Well, what are the four winds that are being held back there? Well, there's a couple of different interpretations that we can give to this. And the first is from Jeremiah chapter 4, verses 11 to 12, because in that chapter of Jeremiah, it says this: at that time, this people and Jerusalem will be told, a scorching wind from the barren heights in the desert blows towards my people, but not to winnow or cleanse. A wind too strong for that comes from me. Now I pronounce my judgments against them. And so the idea in Jeremiah is that the wind of God, the winds of God, are God's judgments being poured out upon his world and upon his creation. And so the idea that the angels are holding back the winds in Revelation 7, verse 1, may be drawing on this idea in Jeremiah that the winds represent God's judgments and the angels are holding back God's judgment on the world. And that, of course, gives us, again, real comfort for the future, that we are currently being spared the judgment of God in the world. And then in Zechariah chapter 6, verse 5, we see a similar idea. It says, these are the four winds of heaven going out from standing in the presence of the Lord of the whole world. So again, we get the idea that the winds represent somehow God's judgments upon the world. And our hope as Christians, of course, is that we will be spared those judgments because we are being held by God and loved by him, and we are saved. So John may be combining the two ideas, firstly from Jeremiah, and then secondly from Zechariah, that these are the judgments of God being held back by the angels. Now, God's judgments, we believe, are real and they will come in full. but his is a controlled judgment. It's not kind of a spur of the moment acting out of wrath and anger and just kind of going and pouring out his judgments on the world. They're controlled by his grace and his mercy and his love. And so we have nothing to fear about God arbitrarily just pouring out judgment out of a kind of reactive anger against us. The angels are holding back his judgment. And God's grace and love is also shown in verse 2 of Revelation chapter 7 with another angel who appears from the east. It says this: Then I saw another angel coming up from the east, having the seal of the living God. That is in Zechariah chapter 6, verse 5. And the same idea is in Revelation 7, this angel who comes from the east. So why is this a symbol to us of God's grace and love? Well, quite simply because of this. Because in the Bible, blessings from God very often, metaphorically, come from the east. So, for example, we see the sun rises in the east, and the sun, of course, is a blessing to us as each day arises afresh and anew. So the sun comes from the east. The Garden of Eden was in the east as well, that place of perfection where humanity lived in a perfect relationship with God was in the east. In the nativity story, the wise men come from the east. And in Ezekiel chapter 43, verse 2, it says, I saw the glory of the God of Israel coming from the east. So we see God's blessings coming from the east. And so the fact that this angel comes from the east is a sign of real blessing for us. Now, this angel who comes from the east also had a seal and seals God's people. Now, a seal was a sign of ownership. And the fact that the angel comes with a seal from the living God means that it's a metaphor, a sign of ownership, that God owns us and he will bless us. So we have no need to be afraid of the judgment of God if we are sealed by God as his followers, as his children. In verse 3, it says, do not harm the land or the sea or the trees until we put a seal on the foreheads of the servants of our God. So the question for each one of us then is, are we servants of God? Are we followers of Jesus? Have we given our lives over to God? And are we following him so that when God comes in judgment, we will be found to have the seal on our forehead, as it were, as a sign of our faith for him? So that's then why the angel comes from the east in that regard. Now, we then come on to this really big question of who are the 144,000? Because in the next part of this passage, there's reference to the 144,000 in heaven. So who are these 144,000? I don't know about you, but for me, this imagery was one of the first things I ever learned about the Book of Revelation, even before I was a Christian, actually, because when I was young at home as a child, very often we used to have the Jehovah's Witnesses come round knocking on our door. And I don't know if it is right or wrong, but my understanding has always been that the Jehovah's Witnesses believe that there will be 144,000 people saved in heaven, and the rest of those who are saved will be on the new earth. Now, I don't know anything really about Jehovah's Witness theology, but that was always my understanding, that was it. So that was kind of one of the very first passages that I ever knew from the book of Revelation, even before coming to faith myself, which was this from Revelation chapter 7, verse 4. Then I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000 from all the tribes of Israel. So the question then is, who is this 144,000? What have you got to do to be numbered amongst them? And how does that number even get arrived at? So that's what we're going to move on now just to think about. And I'd be really interested in your views on this. What have you traditionally believed the 144,000 to be? So please do pop it in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you about that. If you've got a question as well about this chapter 7 of Revelation, then if you're watching on YouTube, then please do pop your question into the comments below, and I will get back to you on each and every one. That is my promise to you. So what is your personal experience, as it were, of the 144,000? Who are they? And what have you always believed them to be? Well, let me tell you what my understanding of this is. And my understanding of it is that the 144,000 are the... Sorry, this is... got that wrong then. This isn't my understanding. This is an interpretation of it that has sometimes been given, that the 144,000 are the Jews who are saved, the Messianic Jews who are saved, and that the great multitude that we come on to in a few moments' time are the Gentiles who are saved. Now, that's quite often how this passage is interpreted. As I say, I'm not convinced of that myself. We're going to come on to why that is the case in a few moments' time, because it seems to me a bit odd that only the Messianic Jews would be sealed and not all the Christians, not all those who are saved. But that is quite often a view that you might have come across, that the 144,000 are the Jews who are saved and the multitude are the Gentiles who are saved. But let me give you an alternative interpretation to that. And my understanding is that actually the 144,000 are all of those who are saved, the entire company of heaven, Jew and Gentile alike. Everyone who is saved is numbered in this kind of metaphorical 144,000. But the question then is, why is it 144,000? Where does that number come from? Is it just a random number, or is there something specifically behind it? Well, the bottom line is, nobody really knows. I'm going to be honest about that. There's lots of ideas out there about it. There's lots of theories about why it should be 144,000, but nobody is absolutely sure. So all I'm going to offer you now is my take on it, if you like, my perspective on it, which is this, that the 144,000 is a representative number. We know that in the Old Testament, there were 12 tribes of Israel. They were the Old Testament people of God, if you like. And so they are represented by the 12 tribes of Israel. And the New Testament people of God, everybody since Jesus onwards, are represented by the 12 disciples, the apostles who kind of founded the church, as it were. So you get 12 times 12. So you get the 12 tribes times the 12 disciples, and that number's 144. And then back in those days when the Bible was written, 1,000 was a number of completeness, wholeness, totality. So if you multiply, if you add that, then you've kind of got your 144,000. I don't know if that's right or not. It's a theory that's out there, and I think it's probably as good as any other theory, but I wouldn't stake my life on it. But that's the idea, that it's 144,000 because it's the Old Testament people the New Testament people, represented by 12 tribes, 12 disciples, 144. The number of completeness brings you 144,000. It might be wrong. It might be right. As I say, please do let me know if you've got another opinion on how that 144,000 number is arrived at. But the key point that I want to bring is this, that actually the number isn't the important thing. We get a bit hung up on the number. Why is it 144,000? But actually, that's not the important thing. There are two really important points that come out of this passage for us, that challenge us in our walk with Jesus. And we're going to come on to that. That is the really important thing. So before we do, can I just say, if you're getting value out of this podcast and you are following on YouTube, then please do click the like button and subscribe to the channel. That would really help push this podcast and all my other podcasts out to a wider audience. And it would encourage me as well, because we all need to be encouraged sometimes, don't we? So please do like it and subscribe if you're finding it of value. Anyway, let's get back to this. These two important points about why this number 144,000 is really important to us. And in order to do that, you might have a Bible open in front of you, you might not, but let me just pop up on the screen here if you are following with me on YouTube. Here is Revelation 7 verses 5 to 8. And what it does is it lists for us how the 144,000 from the tribes of Israel are arrived at. So there's the list of the tribes: Judah, Reuben, Gad, Asher, Naphtali, Manasseh, Simeon, Levi, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. And it says in Revelation 7 verses 5 to 8, from each of these tribes comes 12,000 people, right? But there's something, well, there's two things actually, really interesting about this list. Can you spot what it is? If you look down that list, there are two very, very important and interesting points. The first is this, that it says at the top of the list, from the tribe of Judah, 12,000 were sealed. Now, this is the only time in the Bible where the tribe of Judah is listed first amongst the tribes. It's the only time that happens. So it's quite important for us that Judah tops the list. Now, why might this be important for us? Well, it's important for us, of course, because Jesus comes from the tribe of Judah. He is the Lion of Judah. He is the Man of Judah. And the fact that Judah is at the top of the list here indicates for us that Jesus is the fountainhead of our salvation, if you like. That salvation springs from Judah. It springs from Jesus. So John has deliberately put Judah at the top to make the point there about Jesus being the source and the foundation of our salvation. The second important thing from this list is this. Manasseh wasn't actually a tribe of Israel. It was a subset of the tribe of Joseph. Now, why has John added Manasseh as one of the tribes? Well, there's a tribe missing. And the tribe that is missing is the tribe of Dan. Now, why is Dan missing? It's very interesting about the tribe of Dan in the Old Testament, because the tribe of Dan in Jewish theology traditionally has represented idolatry. Because the tribe of Dan were the tribe that fell into idolatry of worshipping the golden calves. So in Numbers chapter 2:25, it says, "On the north will be the divisions of the camp of Dan under their standard." I'll come back to that verse in a moment. But in 1 Kings chapter 12, you might remember that King Jeroboam had created these two golden calves, and he wanted the people of Israel to worship the golden calves. And Dan was the tribe that worshipped them. So Dan is understood to be a metaphor, if you like, for idolatry. And in Numbers chapter 2:25, it says, "On the north will be the divisions of the camp of Dan under their standard." Well, just as God's blessings came from the east, it's a kind of biblical metaphor that idolatry and wickedness and evil will come from the north. So it's quite an interesting idea there. So in the lists of the tribes that John has given us, Manasseh is added, but Dan is removed. So when it comes to this idea then of the 144,000, what does it mean? I would say don't get too hung up on the number itself. You know, there's ideas around, is it the 12 tribes of Israel times the 12 disciples times 1,000? There's all sorts of ideas out there. The number isn't the important thing. The important thing is this, that we learn from this part of scripture that salvation comes from the line of Judah. Judah is listed first. Jesus is the source of our salvation. And we learn also that salvation is not possible for those who are caught in idolatry, because Dan is missing. So the lesson really from this number, this 144,000, is simply that we should take our Christian discipleship very, very seriously indeed. And we should do all we can to follow Jesus and put him first in our lives and not allow anything else to take his place in our lives. No idolatry. Now, what might idolatry look like in your life or in mine? I don't suppose any of us are going to be worshipping golden calves anytime soon, but sometimes we allow things to displace God from the centrality of our lives, don't we? Sometimes relationships may get in the way of our worship of God. Sometimes it might be, what do we spend our time doing? Are we spending too much time on Netflix, or are we spending too much time gaming, or are we spending too much time, pursuing our ambitions and our goals and whatever? Now, all these things are okay to do. There's nothing wrong with gaming and ambition and, Netflix and all the rest of it. But when our pursuit of that stuff almost becomes an idol and it takes away our time that we should be spending with God, then it displaces God from the throne and it becomes idolatrous to us. So 144,000, it's the number of all the saved. God willing, you and I are included within that number. But we learn that it comes from the line of Judah. And we must not get caught up in idolatry and placing anything else before God as a priority in our lives. Does that make sense? I hope so. So if you are enjoying the book of Revelation, which I hope you are, just another question for you to put down in the comments below if you're following the video version of this. Do you have a favorite passage from the book of Revelation, and why? I'd love to hear from you. The book of Revelation for me, I've mentioned this in previous podcasts. It's my favorite book of scripture. I absolutely adore it. I fell in love with it the moment I became a Christian, many years ago now. 1984, I became a Christian. My goodness me. On Good Friday. And I immediately fell in love with the book of Revelation. I've got a lifelong love of it. And I just feel like even now, I'm only beginning to understand it. I hopefully spend the rest of my life studying it in even more depth. But what about you? Do you have a favorite verse or a favorite passage from the book of Revelation? If you do, let me know in the comments. That would be fantastic. So, we are moving on now a little bit away from the 144,000, and now we come to the next verse, which is Revelation 7, verse 9, that says this: After this I looked, and there before me was a great multitude that no one could count, from every tribe, every nation, tribe, people, and language, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. Now, who is this great multitude that John is talking about here? And are they the same as the 144,000, or are they different from the 144,000? Well, I think it's really interesting. If we go back to Genesis chapter 15, verse 5, God makes this promise to Abraham. He says, Look up at the stars. Look up at the heavens, rather, and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. So shall your offspring be. And God had promised to Abraham that his descendants would be more in number than the stars in the sky. And I think that what John is referring to here in Revelation chapter 7 is, if you like, the fulfillment of the promise that God made to Abraham. God had promised all the salvation of more people than could ever be counted. And I think that that is what is being represented here. So the same, really, as the 144,000. The great multitude is all of us who have been saved, in the same way that the 144,000 is the same as all who've been saved. Because in Revelation 7:14, we're told that they are those who have come out of the great tribulation. They've washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. So all of us are going through the great tribulation, as it were, because we are in the end times, and we are waiting for the second coming of Jesus. So we are all going through that great tribulation at the moment. And as this verse says, it's those who have been taken out of the great tribulation. They've washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. And we too have been washed in the blood of the Lamb, haven't we? If we are saved, if we know that Christ has died for us, then we have been washed in the blood of the Lamb, and our robes are made white. We've been made pure, if you like. We've been counted as righteous because of what Jesus has done on the cross for us. So the great multitude then, as I understand it, is that they are the same as the 144,000. But why then is John repeating it? Well, I think because he's trying to bring out two different points here, isn't he? I think that when he talks about the 144,000, he's given us the idea that salvation comes through Jesus, and that idolatry needs to be avoided at all costs. But then by talking about the great multitude, he's bringing us back to the promise made to Abraham and how God has fulfilled that promise for us. So a couple of different sort of theological points, really, which is why he has repeated that for us. So there we are. We are the 144,000 if we are saved by Jesus. We are part of the great multitude if we are saved by Jesus. And there is no greater truth, is there? There's nothing more that we could possibly want to celebrate than our salvation. And that, of course, is why we then read in Revelation 7:14 that the church cries out, "Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb," the ultimate cry of praise and thanksgiving. But it's really interesting that cry from the church, salvation belongs to our God, who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. There's two other occasions in the book of Revelation where that same cry is made. And the first is in Revelation chapter 12, verse 10, when Satan is ejected from heaven. And the same cry is given by the church at that point. And then the second time in the book of Revelation that happens is in Revelation 19, verse 1, with the overthrow of the Antichrist. And so I think it's really important that our salvation, we recognize our salvation comes from Jesus. And at the heart of our salvation experience is that Satan has been ejected from heaven and from our lives, that the Antichrist has been overthrown, and anything that stands in opposition to God has been defeated. And that is very much at the heart of our salvation experience, the defeat of Satan, the defeat of all that is Antichrist in our lives. And so in Revelation 7, verse 11, we read, all the angels were standing round the throne and around the elders and the four living creatures. They fell down on their faces before the throne and they worshipped God. And we are part of that. This is, John's imagery of heaven, of the whole of creation worshipping God because of the defeat of Satan and the overthrow of Antichrist. And you and I, God willing, are numbered within that number as well. So it's a very, very exciting image to realize that this is a description of who we are and how we will spend our eternity. And John then moves on in the final part of Revelation 7:15 to give some beautiful phrases that describe our eternal destiny in heaven. And the first thing he says in verse 15 is that the church, you and I, all of saved creation, are before the throne of God. Isn't that a lovely image, that you and I are going to spend all eternity before the throne of God? And then it says they serve him day and night. And I can't think of any better way to spend eternity, can you, than serving God, worshipping him, being lost in praise and worship. And in that same verse, John tells us that he who sits on the throne shelters them with his presence. And the phraseology of that in the original Greek picks up on this kind of Hebrew idea of, the Shekinah glory of God shining over his people, protecting us. And it's a beautiful idea, isn't it, that we are going to be protected for all eternity before the throne of God. And it's absolutely gorgeous imagery. And then he goes on in verse 16 to say, never again will we hunger, never again will they thirst. The sun will not beat upon them, nor any scorching heat. Absolute protection by God in heaven for all eternity. Now, this verse is very interesting because it also mirrors Isaiah 49, verse 10, which was given to the people of Israel after their exile. You might remember in the Old Testament where the people of Israel were the people of Judah rather were carried off into exile into Babylon, where they remained for many years, and then eventually they came back from exile. And in Isaiah 49, there's this kind of prophecy about how God will care for them upon their return, and these words are then mirrored by John in Revelation 7:16. And then he goes on to say in the same verse, our eternal destiny in heaven is that the Lamb will be at the center of the throne, and the Lamb will be their shepherd. He will lead them to springs of living water. Isn't this glorious imagery? Isn't this just amazing to think that this is how we're going to be spending all eternity with God, being serving him before his throne, being protected and cared for by him, with the Lamb, Jesus at the center, who will be our shepherd, and he will lead us to the springs of living water. I mean, it's an incredible set of imagery. And then one of my favorite verses in revelation actually is Revelation 7:17, that there's this idea in heaven. Are you ready for this? That God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Oh my goodness me, that's so beautiful, isn't it? I'm sure it's the same for all of us, but I know for myself, I've had some terrible times in my life. My first wife died very young at 36. My sister died at 34. I've lost friends, I've lost relatives. And, I've had many health struggles and all sorts of stuff going on. And I'm sure you have as well. It's not just me. But this idea that when we get to heaven, God will wipe away every tear from our eyes. There will be nothing to cry about. There will be nothing to be upset about anymore. God has got it all in control. And he's just going to heal us and give us perfect peace for all eternity. Isn't that a beautiful, beautiful idea for us to hold on to? So if you're going through a tough time right now, hold on to that hope of the glory of heaven. Good. Well, that's where we're up to at the moment. And as I say, if you're finding this useful, please do click the like button and subscribe if you are on YouTube. That would be absolutely fantastic. And any comments or questions, put them in the box below. Wonderful. So the idea then is of Revelation 7 is fundamentally to assure us that God has everything in control. Even when we look around the world and it seems to be a complete chaotic mess, God's got it all under control, and he seals his followers and he protects his followers. And we have nothing to fear from what is currently going on in the world, ultimately, because our eternal destiny is secure, and we will one day join with all creation in eternal praise and worship, and that in heaven, God will take away all of our grief and all of our sorrow and all of our suffering, and he will care for us for all eternity. And this is such a beautiful, beautiful part of Scripture. So if you're going through a really tough time at the moment, hold on to Revelation 7. Hold on to the truth that no matter what it is you are struggling with right now, there is hope for the future and hope for all eternity, that you can be in the presence of God with no grief and no suffering and no struggle. Just eternal worship, eternally serving God in the presence of God and the Lamb. Wonderful. So I just want to leave you then today with an ultimate question, really, that arises out of this passage, which fundamentally is this. Will you follow Jesus? Will you live for him so that you can know all those benefits of salvation? Will you? And if you've already given your life to Jesus, then that's fantastic. And just to think through how we can be more obedient in our lives to God, and how we can make sure that we don't sort of fall into idolatry, as it were, that we put God at the center of our lives, and we make sure that we're living for him in such a way now that we will be counted righteous and worthy of his love when Jesus returns. So there we are. Thank you for watching. Thank you for putting up with me as I've been trying to operate these new buttons and new ways of doing things. And I hope it hasn't been too distracting for you if you've been watching the video version. If you've been listening to the audio version, you won't have a clue what I'm talking about. And that's absolutely fine. But thank you so much. Please do like it if you found it useful, leave some comments, subscribe if you're on YouTube, and I really do very much look forward to being with you again for the next episode. So until then, keep well, and thanks for giving me so much of your time today. I really appreciate it.